So Panache Cellars is small, very small, one man, basically a one-person operation. I'm primarily focused on making wines from vineyards that have the highest quality fruit that I can find, essentially. Um, I've been using Wyber Vineyard, which is between Monroe and Alpine, about 20 miles south of here. For my Pinot Noir, it's been around quite a while and has been used by some other well-known wineries. So it was a nice opportunity to get in there and get some of their fruit. And probably both my entrance into the wine business was partially driven a little bit by the economy sort of tanking, and some of the vineyards basically had fruit available. Some wineries were cutting back because of the economy, and so I had an opportunity to get fruit from vineyards that had sold all their fruit in the past to larger operations. And so better grapes make better wine, and that's been the focus, to get the best fruit, to make the best wine. It's done on a small scale, so 1-ton fermenters with hand punch downs. It's all done with simple equipment, sort of in an old-fashioned way, because I don't have a large winery with a lot of equipment. I did make wine the first year in Belvalet, so we got to use some of their equipment for sorting and destemming the fruit, but we still made the wine in small fermenters with hand punch downs.
So a lot of entrepreneurs, they always say, oh, this business was, the politicians will say, this business was started by a guy in his garage, So where do you keep your wine now? I mean, you're literally running this out of your garage, right?
Right. Yeah. So when you're making wine, it needs to be produced in a bonded facility. The TTB is very strict about the production of the wine and paying the taxes on the wine. Once the wine is finished and the taxes are paid, it doesn't have to remain in a bonded facility. It can go to a tax-paid location, and that's what we have here. I'm licensed with the state and also TTB, but as a location where I can store my inventory. So it's ended up in my garage, where we have about 250 cases of wine back here. And it's used somewhat for production, but all the wine's been tax paid already, so it's eligible. It can be sold now, and we're just finishing it with the wax dipping that goes on the bottles here. So I just have to dip the wax faster than I can sell it, and I'll be fine.
So you're kind of, some folks jump in, sell everything they have, lease everything they have, and go right into sort of a larger scale production, and you're kind of easing into it. Is that your plan? Or
I think I would like to have a convenient location to make some small lots of wine. To make a large quantity of wine, you almost have to change your techniques and go to larger fermenters and and larger presses, and basically a whole different set of techniques to make it more efficient, essentially. And I don't think I'm really interested in doing that. I would like to make, to slowly expand and get up to 500 cases a year or so. But that can be done on a pretty small scale, like a 500, 600 square foot facility. You could do that, and I like having control over every step of the winemaking process. That's something you don't always have in a bigger facility unless you own it, and then that costs a fortune to own a large facility. So potentially I may get this location bonded. I'm going to pursue that this fall and see if I can do that. I'd have to put a wall in here, but then I'd have maybe a 600 square foot facility that I could make about 500 cases of wine in. I think it could be done. I've got to finesse the issues with no forklift. But I think I just checked a couple weeks ago. I think I can rent a forklift for a couple days to unload the fermenters and go from there.
So is that what, like, if this venture is successful, that's what it looks like for you, is 500 cases a year? And
I think, yeah, what I've been told, and which I've have a month's worth of experience, is it's really the hard part is not making the wine; it's selling the wine. So it's marketing the wine, and I don't have a lot of sales experience, and I'm sort of riding the wave of here in the local area. There's a real focus on local food products and local ingredients, and local wines are part of that. And potentially, I think I can supply the Willamette Valley area, and that might be as far as it goes. So I don't. Yeah, I think. So that kind of production would be pretty easy to sell, I think. Um, so that's sort of the plan for now, at least, I think.
So you've got a full-time job, and you've recently kind of changed your hours to pursue the wine business. What's the
Right, I've cut back to 80%, so 4 days a week, and 1 day a week is now focused on the wine side of the business, mostly the sales and marketing, trying to get out there and call on new customers and get my wine in a location. So that's what I'm leaving time for. It also lets me do some of the other tasks, like run lab samples up, or go look at a vineyard or something. I've got a day a week I can devote to that.
Okay. And I already know this, but what do you do again? Sort of your day job?
So my day job, I work with the student information system at Oregon State University. So I'm an IT guy, computer guy. Pretty much done that all my life. I have a computer science degree from Oregon State a long time ago, and that's my full-time job. And then I'm sort of transitioning to this last career that's really a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to spending more time with the wine business.
So why wine in terms of sort of a last career? Why making wine?
Well, it's fun. It's even the sales side of that is essentially kind of a fun business. I mean, people, it's unlike going to the dentist. Your customers, they don't have to be there. They're not forced to buy wine, and wine sort of brings along with it sort of, people tend to have experiences around wine. They remember wines when they have a particular meal or a picnic or whatever, where they've taken some wine along. It sort of can be a little bit more than just a beverage with your meal, I think. And I enjoy working. The work it's challenging intellectually to essentially to try to understand what's going on with the fermentation, or while it's aging in the barrel. There's a lot of things that can happen with the wine. So the more you learn about it, the more you sort of realize you didn't know about wine, the deeper you get into it. Luckily, I've been able to take classes at Oregon State, so they have a enology program, and I've been able to get into some of those classes and learn a lot more about the wine, and it really helps a lot.
So, and to run a operation on this scale, you've often got volunteer work. Do this without volunteer help, or?
Yeah, I've slowly been working towards that goal. It's about getting the right equipment, and then there's a few steps. The bottling step definitely takes a special set of equipment, and generally is going to take some other people to be involved. But luckily, for small wineries, they often use a bottling truck that can come to your location, or you can move the wine to a location where the bottling truck comes. And that's done by even medium size. A lot of wineries. There was just a TV show about Kendall Jackson, and Kendall Jackson, even though they're a huge company, they actually have their own bottling trucks, and the bottling truck goes to their different winery facilities to bottle. It's just more efficient to have state-of-the-art equipment in one location and move it. So that's a step that I can use the bottling truck for. So I don't need people for that. Pressing is the other step that takes a little bit of help but with a bigger press, you can get that down to 2 people probably. And the same way I probably plan to destem my fruit at a winery facility and then move the fermenters to a location, so I don't need to have a press. I mean, I don't need to have a destemmer and people to help with the cleanup on that. So I think I can almost turn this into a one-man operation.
Now, you still have friends that come out, pretty good sized crew, and then the guys yesterday had their volunteer workforce out there. So why do people want to help you out with this? Why?
Well, it's fun. A lot of us who make wine, or there's a small, a community. A lot of us know each other. Enjoy helping each other out. My tanks are on loan this week to another small winery that's bottling. They loan me equipment. I can borrow equipment, and they'll help out as well. So there is a lot of collaboration and cooperation between wineries to help out. And then friends. It's pretty easy to get friends help you make wine, because the little red hen story, they help make it. They get a little wine. I think they enjoy that, and sort of the experience of helping make the wine and being part of the wine that comes out. It's a little bit of, I think, at least the winemaker's proud of the wine, but I assume the people helping also can feel a little bit of ownership. They bottle 200 cases of wine or whatever they helped with. They can say, I helped with that wine.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem to be hard to line people up to help so far.
Your brother comes up here a lot to help you out and drives quite a ways to help you do those types of tasks. So he must kind of believe in your business operation, or why is he pitching in at that level?
Well, at least, yeah, I think he does enjoy enjoy it. He's actually a career forklift driver, so. In any of my plans, we had some plans that fell through this last fall, but we had a really large outdoor forklift that we were going to be using, and he took a look at it, and he was, I can drive that, no problem. So, and I will, forklift operation's huge in the wine industry, and I've driven one before, but it's been a long time, and so he's actually, he's the forklift operator for my winery, as well as helping out in some other areas. So that he's got a role there, and hopefully I'll get that forklift driving down in the future here.
But yeah, it's still, with all those gas prices, to drive 100 miles or so to help you out must be it's a pretty big commitment of time to get you up and running.
Yeah, it's been real helpful. I think but he enjoys it. He likes it's just kind of fun when we get together to make wine, and he does get a little bit of wine. He's more of a beer drinker, but he does get a little bit of wine from helping out, and I think he enjoys it too. He enjoys helping out. It's interesting, I think, too. Some people find it interesting, the steps you need to go through.
So this entrepreneurial impulse that you have, to start a business. So you make wine as a hobby in the garage, and then you decide to take it to a commercial step. Where does that impulse come from?
Partly, probably the largest factor there was trying to improve the quality of the wine. When I first started making wine, we were buying. There was a local operation here in town that was buying a large quantity of fruit from a commercial vineyard and then splitting that up with small winemaking groups. And I was in on that for a couple of years. The problem, the fruit quality was pretty good, but I was limited to whatever the contract was for that 1 year. And as I started to explore getting my own fruit, we did try that a little bit when I was making wine in my garage from other vineyards. I found out it was a lot harder to arrange for a contract because most commercial vineyards do not. A lot of them have 5-ton minimum, 10-ton minimum, or certainly 1-ton minimums. They just don't have the time to deal with somebody with a small quantity when they've got quite a few acres and they're trying to get the fruit produced. And so to buy the smallest amount from a high quality vineyard that they'll deal with, I essentially had to become commercial. You can't legally make more than 200 gallons in the U.S. and to get the high quality fruit, I had to buy more fruit and come up with and just go ahead and start the business just to get access. So that definitely was a major factor, was make more wine and sell some of it and just keep some of it just to get the better fruit. I mean, that really was the factor. And then I do have an MBA, so I have that sort of business, some training in setting up a business. When I took my MBA, the most interesting class I took was an entrepreneurship class about starting a business. It was really interesting. So anyway, so I sort of have that. And I have a lot of experience from my first career in the Navy. I was in the logistics side of the Navy, so winery operations, to a large extent, take a lot of logistics. There's arranging all the equipment and the fruit to come in, and then making sure you have everything you need, and bottling involves getting all the packaging components, the label approved and the label printed, and capsules and glass, and having that all come together at the right spot at the right time for bottling. So a lot of moving parts in a winery operation, and that was all. I was all very comfortable with that kind of thing. So that part's come together well, the business side of it. We just have to get the sales rolling.
Now, what gives you sort of confidence that your wines can compete with some big outfits that have, UC Davis trained winemakers, or a lot of investment funds, or access to the best vineyards and marketing?
Well, a couple of things. I think one advantage I have over a large operation is they have to control their costs. Their labor costs are expensive in a large winery operation, and they have a lot of money, a lot of capital tied up in their operation, and they've got to essentially often are going to be making compromises about what they're doing, because they end up with fruit from a vineyard that they've contracted from. It wasn't the best year, let's say. They've already got a contract. It's maybe meets the minimum specs, and the winemaker's job is to make wine out of that, to make the best wine they can out of that. They can blend it, or they can sell some of it off in bulk. They have decisions they can make about it. But in the end, that winemaker is essentially, has to produce some wine from not always the best fruit necessarily, and even in their in sorting operations, some wineries get very fancy about sorting the fruit before it goes into the fermenter, and those are some pretty high-end ones with a lot of volunteers and stuff. But a lot of and the one thing I have is sort of the time. It's only my time that I have, and the volunteers I can get. We can do some things that are pretty crazy that a normal winery would never do, or never attempt to do, because the labor cost, it just doesn't pencil out. Well, I don't have to pencil out to make this wine. We can do whatever we want. One of the funny things we did, not all our ideas work out, but it was 2008, we sorted almost every single berry of the Merlot without really having a sorting table. It was
had sort of did you have a plan going into this? Did you have any idea when you were just starting out on this and say, hey, I'm going to start a wine business? Did you know what you were getting into?
Well, so I made wine 2006, 7, and 8. I made wine for 2 years. I've been making wine when I sort of thought maybe to get better fruit, maybe I need to go up a notch and buy a larger quantity, and then try to get licensed to do that. And it seemed like it was doable in terms of, there's a lot of regulation, so there is a lot of paperwork to get licensed. But that was probably the hardest part of it. The technical issues around making the wine, those weren't very significant to solve it. Other than getting a location that where I could make it legally in a bonded facility. That was the trick. But I made quite a few batches of wine the first couple of years. Like in 2007, I think we made 4 different wines that year. Some of them were small, but And then I also started that year to share crop fruit, some Pinot Noir. I learned how to, went out and started working in a vineyard where they had a few rows. It was more than the owner who had planted them really wanted to deal with, so he asked for some people to help, and we were able to get the fruit for doing that work. So that also got me more interested in the potential. I started to learn more about growing grapes and about the work that's required to get high quality fruit and what kind of decisions are made. And so that kind of was the icing on the cake where I realized how important the vineyard was. And then I also realized it's an awful lot of work in the vineyard, and it's some hard work. And I realized I didn't want to own a vineyard. I mean, it's definitely challenging, but you're at the mercy of the weather and a lot of other factors. Deer, we lost all of our fruit to birds one year. There was, what we would normally have had several hundred pounds of fruit, we had 25 pounds of fruit. They ate 90% of the fruit right off the vines, and so there's huge risk there, and it's hard to get good fruit. So I really, working with somebody who's got a larger vineyard who's figured that out is really valuable. And I sort of realized that, hey, I need to line up with the people who know how to do this, and they've got a big enough vineyard that the birds won't eat all their fruit. Or they use netting. Some people use netting, but so that was a consideration when I got into learning how to grow the fruit, grow it, and get high quality. I sort of made a decision. Okay, I can't do both, so I'm going to focus on the wine and focus on getting higher quality fruit from some vineyards that do that.
So now you don't have the vineyard, you don't have that actual winery location. So what's sort of the process overview of how you work making I guess, would you call it a virtual winery, or?
Yeah, in Oregon, you could call it a virtual winery. They allow the state license. This is a licensed winery here, 104 square feet behind me. I've got the little duct tape marked off here where I keep the wine. And the wine's made in a bonded facility, so it's a little bit challenging because you've got to work out a contract arrangement with somebody a place to make the wine that's bonded until it comes out bottled at the end. So that's been a challenge, and that's been a big challenge because it's hard to control your costs. You may end up paying quite a bit for services in that facility. And also the part I probably like the least, depending on the situation, depending on their insurance and just the operation and the way things work, you have less direct responsibility for making the wine in some locations. And so that's probably the biggest factor for me, is I want to have my own location where I can make the wine the way I want to make it and get access to the wine 24/7 to do whatever I want to do. If I want to stay there overnight while it's fermenting and check the fermentation, you can do those kinds of things. And that's the beauty of making wine here, is it's so convenient, and you can check the wine as often as you need to, essentially, even if it's several times a day, or doing punch downs 3 times a day instead of once or twice. You can do that if you've got access to the facility. So that's my long-term goal, is to get in my own small facility, which potentially this could be it. We'll see if that works out this fall. If not, I'll try to find another facility, or in Oregon, or federally too, it's an alternating proprietorship, is where you sort of become partners in a winery operation, or lease the space, but essentially have a facility where you have a portion of the space that you can make wine in. So that's the direction I'd like to go, for sure.
So what's some of your favorite parts of the process where you feel you have some creative input in making a wine? What is the most exciting part for you in the process of making wine?
Well, so I think some of that is finding the grapes are so important in the final product that tracking down a vineyard and trying to get a relationship with a particular vineyard really makes a huge difference. So that part I've done okay on with a couple of vineyards that I'm working with. Well, a third one, a new vineyard I'm working with down in the Applegate Valley. It's sort of you know, when you're small, I don't have a lot of resources to know what the different vineyards, what their fruit's like, but that's just sort of hit or miss to try, you know, go down, meet some people, talk to them, talk to people who've made the wine before, talk about what the specs on their fruit came out in previous years. So far I think I've been lucky. As the 2 vineyards I bottled so far, I'm really excited about, and I want to work with those again. And I just have another Applegate Valley vineyard that I just started working with, and I think that's going to turn out the same way. So I'm hoping to get long-term relationships with vineyards with high-quality fruit. So that part's, it just makes the rest of the work so much easier, for sure. And then secondly, I guess the fermentations. I have taken a wine production principles class, which is the main theory class on winemaking, and I've done a lot of reading. So you have the ability to really pay close attention to the fermentation when you're doing it on a small scale, a 1-ton fermenter. And I think there's a lot of decisions that go into, you know, how you're going to have that fermentation proceed, the yeasts that you're going to use. I do use commercial yeasts for my fermentations, and so the interesting stuff is doing, I did a yeast trial in 2010 with my Pinot Noir. I had basically only used one yeast that's widely used in Burgundy, and in Oregon here it's probably, as far as I know, the most widely used yeast for Pinot Noir fermentations, but people use different yeast to get sort of different sort of styles, or to have more complexity in the wine, and so I did a yeast trial just to try a different yeast against the one I'd used every year, and I liked the results. So I used it's more of a Rhone. It's more commonly used with Rhone wines. It's D254, but it's also used with Pinot Noir, and so I did that, and that was interesting. We kept the wine separate as it went through the ferment. You know, they were fermented in separate fermenters. We were able to keep the lots in separate barrels through the process, and so that's sort of that winemaking decisions you make about improving the wine. You sort of experiment one year, but you don't want to change too many things because it's a very complex process. So I essentially try to maybe tweak, you know, a couple of things every year and see whether I like those or not. So this one was successful. I think I'll continue to use that yeast in more of my wines because I like the results that came out of that.
Do you have any thoughts or advice on people who are this kind of a scale of an operation? You know, what if somebody's like, hey, you know, I'd like to do this. You know, a lot of you talk to wine writers and they say, oh, there's so many wineries in Oregon, and how can people compete? And it's just too hard. It's so, you know, people who are more established say, oh, it's a lot different. When I started, that there wasn't that many, and now everybody wants to get into the business. Do you see any different challenges, or have any advice if somebody who came up to you and said, hey, you know, I'd like to try doing that? What would you tell them?
Well, I guess I mean, in the end, it's about the quality of the wine. So I think you would want to have some confidence that you've made wine and people like your wine, or you've made wine and some people like your wine. I mean, so wine styles vary, and certainly certainly my preferences in some of the wines I drink are, I tend to like different wines, more distinctive wines that are a little different, that aren't quite the same. That's one of the things that's part of the side that motivated me a little bit to get into this was Italian wines. There's Barolos, Barbaresco, Chianti. Some of those, they can be quite different because they're often produced by small producers who have their sort of house style, and there's more traditional winemakers, and then some make it in a more modern style, and you get some very interesting wines that way that are out there, and they don't all taste the same. and I think in old world wines generally they do have a wider range of styles that are available than say in the U.S., where I think that's maybe a knock on some of a lot of the people who've been through UC Davis. There's sort of a consistency, a product that they want to have, or a house style that they want to produce, and so they focus on that. And so that's something you can do when you're small, is make wines that are a little bit different. But people have to buy them in the end, so they have to be wines that people like. So I guess if you were going to do that, you would probably want to have some confidence that you knew you could make some wine that people enjoyed. And the jury's still out on my wine, because when I made wine in the past, of course, it was in my garage and I couldn't sell it, and everybody I gave a bottle to loved it. But I don't know if they loved getting the free wine or they really loved my style of wine. I mean, now this is the acid test. Okay, here's my wine. You've tasted it. Now do you want to buy some wine? So that's the trick here. We'll see what happens.
So how are you going to judge that then? As if you're able to take that wine behind you and get rid of it all, or
make this pile go all the way. So this is the wine waiting to be dipped in wax, and those are the wax piles. Just want to make these piles go away here in the next year or so, and that'll be fine, because that'll finance another 250 cases of wine. And as long as I'm not losing money, I'll be happy.
So is that what it would take then, what would it take to get you out of the business? Or is there anything that worries you, or anything that, since you've started this whole process, you thought, oh, wow, I didn't realize what I was getting into? Or
if I can't sell the wine, I've done the math. My wife and I would have to drink, we'd be drinking for 3 or 4 years. That's every day for 3 or 4 years, all the wine we'd ever consume. That would probably get me out of the wine business, because I like variety, just like anyone else does. You can't drink the same wine every day. But as long as I can make the piles disappear, get my money back to make the next batch of wine, I think I'd keep going for quite a while. It's always interesting to make a new wine. So this year I'm experimenting with Tempranillo. I'm real happy with the results, so I'm definitely going to buy. I contracted for 1 acre of Tempranillo, and I plan to contract again for that acre and make 200, probably 100 to 200 cases of wine with the Tempranillo. So that's the part that is getting a varietal that you're happy with the results, and from that vineyard and continuing to work with them, you can make some really interesting wines.
So with the 400 wineries in Oregon now, or 470, the number keeps going up, but do you feel any concern that the market's getting oversaturated, or do you even think about that? Or
no, I do think about it. I think the things I know about, for one thing, Pinot Noir is a big factor here in Oregon, and certainly U.S. consumption of Pinot Noir is very low, relatively low, compared to things like Merlot and Cab. So the potential for growth is huge. That I think and for that matter, even wine produced in Oregon and Washington, all of our Northwest wines, the percentage that's consumed in the U.S. is very small. So the growth, there's potential huge growth there, essentially. So I'm pretty optimistic about the future, because I think one of the problems I see, though, you go somewhere else in the U.S. or even in California, and you just don't see any Northwest wines on the shelves, or very few. And I think people just, they just need to, that's going to change, I think, as people get more opportunities to taste our wines, and as there's more exposure and the distribution gets, more wide, or wider distribution for a lot of wines, I think that'll just go up. The growth has been good for Northwest wines the last few years.
What makes Northwest wines stand out from other regions?
Well, so for here in Oregon, we grow a lot of cold climate varietals, at least in the Willamette Valley, and then in in Southern Oregon we have like the Tempranillo that I'm getting from down there is a warmer climate varietal. I think it's Oregon and Washington are newer areas, and so it's a matter of the vineyard owners learning what particular varietal or what clone of that varietal works on their site, and in that area generally. So as the first guy goes in and plants in what looks like a good spot for grapes, and they get some results, it takes a really long time to make those adjustments and figure out which varietal to get in there and which rootstock with that varietal, and then how much water and how dense to plant the vines, and all those decisions. It takes years and years. I mean, that's the jump. If you look at Burgundy, for example, they've been farming there for a really, really long time, and so they've kind of figured that out. And that's sort of the challenge here, but I think it's beginning to happen. So Willamette Valley Pinot Noir obviously is becoming widely accepted as world class. I think a lot of the wine we do here in Southern Oregon, the Tempranillo, there's the Umpqua Valley area is becoming known for Tempranillo. So I think there's opportunities for other varietals to get in the right spot, and then once they're in the right spot with the right handling, they'll produce really high quality fruit that makes great wine. And Eastern Washington, the Sangiovese fruit that I get, essentially it's a very high altitude, kind of a desert, a sagebrush desert all around this vineyard, and he's got some water, so he's able to basically it's just a spot where this fruit does fantastic. So the chemistry on the wine, on the grapes when they come in, it's still high in acid, but it's got lots of sugar, it's got lots of flavor, and so he's just found this spot right there where it's a home run every time he makes, every time we harvest. So I think that's the kind of thing that as it gets more widely distributed, people will start to recognize that. I'm not knocking California wines. They've got their Cab and Merlot down there in the right spots that they've been growing for a long time, and they produce super high quality wines, no doubt about it.
So how? So you obviously your wife is on board, and your brother is helping you out. How important is that family support? How does it?
Oh well, the wife being supportive is a huge factor, obviously, because it takes a lot of time. Takes weird hours. Fruit flies potentially around the house for a couple of months, or at least in the vicinity of the house sometimes, depending on the weather. So yeah, that's an important factor in getting the extra help. And my daughter, who will be 21 soon, is already essentially signed up to help out a little bit too. But it hasn't been too hard because the wine business is kind of fun. I mean, it is a naturally kind of fun and interesting business. People enjoy, being around wine and working with the wine. I think that's what I've found to be the case anyway.
So have you had to make any sacrifices to get this going?
Well, the sacrifice sometimes is that you have no control over the weather and some events that are going to happen, like harvest. You have a lot less control over that than you think, even though you try to schedule everything. So I've had a very supportive boss who grew up on a farm and essentially understands, hey, when it's time to pick, it's time to pick. That's the time you just have to do it. And so that's been real helpful, because if that had not been the case, that would be hard to deal with. You just don't have any advance notice. Sometimes it's like, okay, I'm off tomorrow, and I've got to take a day off to do this step. So that's been that might be a challenge for a lot of people, because that is you don't have control over your time during the harvest season, during crush and the fermentations. It takes really, really long hours for 3 or 4 weeks. But then after that, it's not as much of a time commitment. So I haven't, I don't, the sacrifices the remainder of the year aren't that bad, but there is that month or so during crush. That's pretty crazy.